Welcome to Be a Better Marketer, the podcast where top marketing minds share the latest trends, strategies, and real-world tips to help you grow your business and sharpen your skills. Whether you're a pro or just getting started, this is your edge in the marketing world.
Hi, welcome to the Be a Better Marketer podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Rosenstein. Today I have the honor of interviewing Philippa Gramse. Philippa, thank you so much for coming on our show today.
Hi, thank you very much, Daniel.
Can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a digital marketing and analytics strategist. So that means that I help people to understand what's working with their website, what's not working, where they may be missing opportunities for new products or services or increased revenue in some other way, and where they may be wasting money on stuff that doesn't work.
Thank you very much. Do you focus on any particular industries?
Not particularly. The thing about analytics is that once you know what you're doing, you can apply it in many different ways. And I mean, my philosophy is that I always partner with the business owner. I mean, any business owner is going to know more about their business than I do, obviously, and more about their industry than I do. And, if we work together and put our expertise together, then hopefully we get more than the sum of our parts, as they would say. There are a couple of industries that I don't like working with, but that's the other side of the coin.
Great. Can you explain why do people need to care about analytics? I mean, some people think you only need to run ads on Google or Meta ads or TikTok, and then that's your whole marketing strategy.
Well, you really need to figure out what works for your audience and for the types of visitors that you want to get. And I can certainly tell you that, why do you need analytics? Because if you don't have analytics, then you're shooting in the dark with everything that you're doing with your web strategy. Because the truth is, you don't know what's happening on your website. People say to me, can you look at my website and tell me what you think? And I mean, yeah, I could, but that would be a very subjective opinion, because it's only my opinion. And I don't have any data to back up what I think. And so what I think might be more informed than some people because I've been doing this for a long time, but it's still just what I think. And so one of the things that analytics gives you is actual information, actual data about what's going on that you can use to track your traffic and your trends and what changes, to try things and see if it makes a difference. And without that, you're just shooting in the dark with your entire investment in what you're doing. Because even if you're getting sales and, people will say, look, I'm getting sales, I know it's working. But then, for most businesses, wouldn't you rather get more sales? I mean, wouldn't you rather always keep growing? Wouldn't you rather know about other opportunities that you might have and so on? Web analytics is really, if you have a website that plays any kind of a part in your business, then you're really not being intelligent about your business if you're not using analytics.
I mean, can you walk through the process? If a website's getting 100,000 visitors a month, I mean, how does that really tell a story?
Well, it depends. I mean, if it gets 100,000 visitors a month that are completely unqualified and not interested for that site and not interested in what it's serving, then obviously it's a waste of time. Just sheer numbers. It's quality, not quantity, that's really important. I mean, obviously, if they're the right kind of visitor and this site's getting 100,000 visitors, then, whether or not that's good depends on the size of the business. I mean, if Amazon were to get 100,000 visitors a month, they'd be pretty upset, right? If I were to get 100,000 visitors a month, I'd probably be quite pleased. Everything has to be in the context of each business.
So what particular metrics do you focus on?
So again,
impressions, clicks, or?
Well, again, that has to be in context of the business. People say, what kind of metrics should I always measure? And honestly, I don't like to give generic lists because you want to go way further than impressions and clicks. Because the point is so there's a so what to it. What was that visitor worth to you? What was that click worth to you? Especially if you paid for it, especially if you're doing some sort of pay-per-click advertising. So you just don't want, impressions and clicks for the sake of it. You want high quality impressions and clicks. So you need to track beyond that initial, how did they get to my website, and through, okay, and then what did they do? And did they do the kinds of things on my site that I want them to do?
So do you only track like what's happening on the website? Do you track also things that's off the website? What I mean is like, like to your point, like if somebody goes to a website, fills out a form, becomes a lead, and goes into the company's like CRM system, is that part of what your analysis does?
For me, no, but obviously that is a part of the larger analysis for the business. I basically specialize in the web end of things.
So you can maybe give me an example of like how you worked with a client in the past, so our audience can better understand like exactly like what like what your service kind of like entails.
So essentially, if somebody comes to me and they have a website and they want to know what's going on, the first thing we need to do is to make sure that their data is good. So you want to make sure that things are being tracked correctly. I use mostly Google Analytics 4. So one of the things about GA4, it's free, so it's quite popular. A lot of people use it. But it comes, if you get it out of the box, it comes with some default settings that aren't necessarily the most helpful to a business. And so one of the things I do is make sure the default settings are set up to the best advantage of that individual business. And then you want to go on and do some sort of customization. And again, for each business. So Google Analytics 4 is really powerful in that it can track an awful lot of things that people do on a website, but quite a bit of that needs some actual further customization. So to give you an example, by default, it tracks how many people will scroll 90% of the way down a page, which sounds okay, except that, especially if it's a long page, to go 90% of the way down is really quite a long scroll. And why do you want to know that? Because you want to know what kinds of things do people not see. So if I've only scrolled 50% down the page and your main call to action is at the bottom of the page, I'm never going to see your main call to action, right? So you'd want to know that. If there's a really important video that's 75% down the page, right? And again, you really want me to see that video and I never go that far, I'm not going to see it. You want to know that. One of the things that I usually do is set up custom tracking, which can measure whatever you want, but I tend to say, 25, 50, 75, and then the 90%, so that we have a much clearer idea of how far down the page people typically go. You can you can measure clicks on specific buttons. You can measure things like people putting things into their shopping cart if you have an e-commerce site and then abandoning somehow and not actually completing the transaction. You can measure, for example, a lot of people have carousels and maybe they have testimonials in a carousel, or they have a slideshow of a portfolio, and you want to see, do people actually engage with that and move through it, or do they only see what the initial screen says? And quite an important one, or two quite important ones, again, by default, Google Analytics is supposed to track form completions, but which is very helpful to know, because you want to know how many people see the page with the form on it. That might be a lead form or a contact form, right? And then how many people actually complete that form. So you're going to know how many people see the page. You might not know how many people complete the form. And unfortunately, so two things. One, a lot of times, depending on how these forms are coded, because there's a lot of different ways of putting a form onto a website, GA4 doesn't track it correctly. And so you don't get that information. And it only obviously applies kind of one method. And so again, somebody like me has to come along and figure out how that form works and then set it up so that it can be tracked. The other thing that's quite helpful to know is how many people start filling in the form and don't complete it. Because form design is quite an art. And if the form's too long and it puts people off, then they won't finish it. And also, if you ask questions that people find annoying or objectionable, they won't finish it. I often find forms that I have to fill in and they say, for a lead magnet of some kind, and they'll say, what's the annual income of your business? And honestly, I don't think that's any of their concern. I don't know why they need to know that. I'm sure they do need to know that, but I'm not necessarily inclined to tell them. And, either I don't complete the form, or I put complete rubbish information, like, I'm making over 500 million a year or something ridiculous. Understanding how your forms are working and how visitors are interacting with them is really helpful to be able to optimize that process. And similarly, videos, the same thing. Videos, Google Analytics will measure if it's a YouTube video. It won't necessarily measure it by default if it's not, but you can measure other forms of video. And again, what I'm saying measure, what I mean is understanding not only who starts watching a video, but how many people watch it all the way through to the end, and if not, where they drop off. And you can get those kind of analytics on YouTube. But you can also integrate them into GA4. So you can learn more about that specific visitor and where they've been, how they came to you and what else they've done. All of this stuff is really, really important to know if you really want to optimize the visitor experience.
I mean, you mentioned before that sometimes people don't even set up Google Analytics properly. How do business owners, entrepreneurs even know that if they set it up correctly?
Well, they don't. I mean, you really can't unless you go through it and you know what you're looking for. And when I say this, I don't kind of do training myself. There's an awful lot of really good resources online for training in Google Analytics 4 that will go through all of this if the business owner actually wants to engage with it themselves. But obviously, if not, they can hire somebody who knows what they're looking for to do it for them, which obviously might be quicker and easier if it's not something they really want to get involved in.
So what you're saying is you don't just tell, business owners or, executives how much clicks their website's getting. You also tell them how percentage are people watching the videos on the website? If so, what are the percentage of the videos? Are they even seeing the form? They're seeing the testimonials? How much of the form are they filling out? Which is, to me, almost business metrics, important business metrics that really impact the business, not just, airy-fairy, statistics. It's your website got 50,000 impressions this month, but it's who cares? What is the meaning to that?
Well, because the point, you're in business presumably to make money. Most people are in business to make money, right?
Yeah.
And so, as I said before, if you've got 100,000 visitors and none of them have done any of the things that you wanted them to do on your site, what was the point of that? So just measuring clicks and impressions is all nice, but it doesn't get you to the end result, which is how many of these people actually completed an action that we wanted them to take, and what were their characteristics that we could make more of? Do they come from a particular source, so that if we see a lot of traffic from that source that's more likely to do what we want, then we can make more of an investment in that source? I mean, you talked earlier about, meta ads or other social media ads. And I have to say, especially B2B, but in general, a lot of the time, people do social media ads because everybody thinks they should, because they tend not to be quite as expensive as Google ads. But with analytics, you can separate out all the traffic who came from a specific ad or a specific campaign or a specific platform. And you can look at what happened with those visitors. And based on that experience, I can say that very often those visitors are very poor quality. They don't stay very long. They tend not to do a lot of exploring because for most of the time, people on social media are not in the mode of looking for solutions to their problems, right? They're talking with friends, they're being entertained, they're watching cat videos or whatever it might be. And almost always, visitors who come to you from a search are more high quality because they're proactively looking for something that they want to know about right now. And visitors who come from your email newsletter, if you have one, are also very high quality because they already know about you. They already know they like your stuff because they've agreed to hear from you on an ongoing basis. And when you look at things like the level of engagement, what they do, how much of your content they consume, and obviously how much money they spend, or if you're a lead gen site, how many leads you get or referrals or whatever it might be, those visitors are typically much higher quality. So it's really, again, important, if you're doing ads on social media, the social media platform is going to tell you how many clicks you got. And that's all great. And yes, there's a level of brand awareness that will go with that. But really, you want to get to your analytics and look for those people and say, okay, and were they the kind of visitor that I'm looking for? Because if not, then what you're spending has got a very limited return.
So what do you think, in your experiences, do business owners or other marketers overlook when they're, looking at their analytics?
What do they overlook? Well, I think that they overlook what I'm talking about, which is, it's very easy to go into the analytics and get completely overwhelmed very, very quickly because there's so many charts and dashboards and reports and numbers, and people don't really know what they mean, which, unless you look at this stuff all day, every day. And so it's quite tempting, actually, to just sort of say, well, okay, are there more visitors than there were last week? Did we get more clicks than we did last week, or whatever it might be? And if the answer to that is yes, say, great, I can go away now. And that's really not the point. So unless you know what you're looking for, you need to really be aware of what outcomes you're looking for, what pages those outcomes take place on, and start studying, well, am I getting, the outcomes that I'm looking for? Is what I want to happen happening? And if not, let's start working on why not, and try to do more of it. Let's look for our most successful traffic sources and try to do more with those and get rid of some of the ones that aren't so successful, or at least stop spending money on them if we are. I mean, you want to go in there with some practical ideas of what you need to know in order to make it worth doing.
So, like, when you work with like a client on helping them with analytics, do you just give them advice, like the actual like data? You actually like give them specific recommendations saying, oh, people are not filling out the form, and here's like my recommendation on filling out the form. Do you actually you ask like some clients give you permission to access the website and you can make changes to the form yourself?
No, that I don't do. I don't do web development at all. No, not my problem. No. And I don't do SEO at all either. I might well say, look, I think you really need to beef up your organic traffic. I think that would help you, but I'm not going to actually do that. But yes, I mean, look, we have AI now, right? Google Analytics has AI built in. It will tell you the trends. It will say, hey, look, you've got a spike on visitors on this day, or, you made more money on this day than any other day. And you can look at that and say, oh, well, that's because we put out an email newsletter that day or something like that. And AI can make wonderful reports for you that look much more pretty than I can do. All of that is really helpful. AI can crunch data. The real question and the real skill, I think, is in the so what. So what are we going to do about it? And I'm not sure that AI is yet there in terms of being able to work with a specific business. And absolutely, I mean, I think the actual value of somebody like me is A, understanding what kind of customization is really going to make sense for you, and then B, looking at what we get and saying, okay, here's where I think we need to pay attention. Here's maybe some things that we need to try doing differently, etc.
Yeah, and some companies they do a lot of different types of marketing, like you said, like they're doing SEO, they're doing email marketing, they're doing organic social media, paid social media, and then it becomes almost like a spaghetti where they have 10 different traffic sources going to the website, and they don't know what's really working or what's really helping. Are you able to figure that out by looking at the analytics when they have multiple sources of traffic?
Well, yes, because the analytics will separate that traffic out by each source. So you can study each traffic source individually and see how valuable it is to you. So yes, absolutely. I mean, that's really the point.
Yeah. So and what about, is there certain like websites, like how they're built? Like you were talking about, like, I know you don't do web development, but do you like often find that certain types of softwares, like either WordPress, Go High Level, they're more compatible with things like GA4 or not compatible? I think they're all the softwares these days.
I mean,
doesn't matter if you're using like anything from Kajabi to WordPress to any enterprise level software.
I don't want to get into talking about individual pieces of software. And I think in general, most website platforms these days will integrate with analytics. Some of them offer their own that typically are not quite as powerful. And yeah, I mean, I usually there's an integration. There are a couple of issues. One is iframes, which is that's a technical term for where you embed code from a third party vendor into your website. So it looks like it's part of your site. I mean, maybe it's a form or a video or something like that, but it actually comes from somebody else, I don't know, one of a credit card booking system or something like, or a calendar or something like that. And it's actually within your website page. It might be a catalog or something like that. And the problem with that is that if the code comes from the third party vendor, then it's not actually part of your website, and the analytics isn't going to find it because it's not coming from your site. It's coming from their server. And so that can get complicated, and there are ways around it, but it's a bit of a pain. It can be a pain. So you do have to be aware of that. You have to be aware, for example, if you've got links to other sites, like you've got Calendly or something, or a Zoom or something like that, these programs now will integrate with Google Analytics so that you can have a seamless view of somebody clicks on a calendar link and then they go through and do they complete a booking, an appointment or whatever. But again, they've got to be set. You've got to set up that integration. So a lot of the time you can do it and it's fine. Occasionally it can be a pain, but that's usually where you have to just be careful. It's where you're working with other sites or other vendors.
Being that you've been in the industry for many years, can you maybe share with us how analytics has evolved over the years? Is there anything in the last several years that's new or different than
obviously, yeah, well, AI obviously is one of them. The fact that now, there's a lot of AI that you can plug in and it will tell you basic trends and make nice charts and stuff like that. And to some extent, it can do more than that. I mean, I don't want to diss it. AI can do predictive analytics, which is to say, look, based on these patterns, potentially your sales next month could be X. I mean, which is really helpful when you're talking about fulfillment and planning and logistics and stuff like that. So looking at the data and doing some sort of predictions about where you're going to go is something else that AI can now do. And of course, we have much more data crunching and data analysis capabilities than we did when analytics started. And we have better, more user-friendly visualizations and so on. And these days, we probably talk in a lot more sophisticated ways about things like what we call attribution, which is where, typically somebody doesn't buy on the first time they visit your website. So say they come in from a search engine and then they see your news, they get on your newsletter, they come back from that, and then maybe they see an ad and they remember that they were going to buy something or some, I don't know, I'm making this up, but the point is, they come in several times from different sources, and on the third or fourth visit, they buy something. And so as marketers, you want to know, what's what we call my cost of acquiring a visitor. So how much did I spend and which are my best traffic sources? And so attribution then asks the question, how do we attribute the credit? How do we give credit to each of these different sources of these different visits in terms of generating the actual sale? And there are lots of different ways of doing it and lots of different philosophies of doing it. And that's a conversation. I'm not saying there's any right or wrong way to do it, but these kinds of conversations I don't remember back in the very early days of analytics.
Yeah, definitely attribution plays a big role, especially with people talking about a cookieless world. They've been talking about getting rid of cookies, so those tracking capabilities are no longer with us, and there's third-party data, first-party data that websites are now looking at and creating their own systems, alternative systems. What are your thoughts about that, about how some companies are deprecating the use of cookies now and it's getting harder to track people?
Well, actually, Google just announced that they're not going to deprecate third-party cookies after all, which is kind of a real huge U-turn.
Yeah,
where we've been.
That was a big surprise, wasn't it?
But I feel like we get a little over hysterical about cookies to some extent. I like to sort of give this example. What do cookies do? They make our lives easier in some ways as visitors because they remember stuff like our login and the things that we have in our shopping cart or on our wish list that if the cookie didn't exist, we'd have to start again with. So as an example, in the real world, let's say you go into a shoe shop, and you see a pair of shoes and you really, really like this pair of shoes and you try them on and they're incredibly comfortable and they're just what you want, but the shop only has them in black and you don't want black, you really would like a pair in brown. So even though they're absolutely great shoes, you say, well, maybe not, and you leave the store. And then a couple of weeks later, you go back in the store, just it's, you know, you like the store, you're browsing, and one of the shop assistants comes rushing up to you and says, "Good morning, sir. You remember those black shoes that you tried on a couple of weeks ago that you really, really liked, and you wanted brown, and now actually we've have a pair in brown in your size. Would you like to see them?" Right? You in the real world would think that's great service, wouldn't you? You'd think, wow, this shop assistant has a great memory. That's excellent service. I really appreciate it. I love those shoes. I'm buying them right now. Right? And in some ways, that's what a cookie does. but because, you know, so it remembers that you were on the website and you like these black shoes, but you didn't buy them. And it might not know that you wanted the brown shoes, but, or maybe it will because you put in a search for brown and you got, sorry, we don't have these or whatever, you know, but that's to some extent what cookies can do. And yes, they can be way over intrusive. And yes, we need to worry about our privacy. There's absolutely no question. And sites get hacked and all the rest of it. But I also think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that sometimes cookies can do things that make our lives easier or our experience more pleasant.
It's great. I mean, I'm an SEO expert and I've been doing it for about 15 years, and I use Google Analytics a lot, and I integrate Google Search Console with Google Analytics. So you can see all the data in one place. And to your point, it is very valuable to see like all that information in Google Analytics, because now they can integrate the two systems together. Many years ago, they weren't able to do that. And it is really helpful to see like how much SEO traffic and what keywords are driving traffic to the website, so you can better optimize the website for SEO.
And actually, that's another way that analytics has changed, because unfortunately, back in the day, we used to be able to do that queries report that tells you what keywords brought people to your website. And we used to actually be able to marry that with landing pages so that we could see, you know, which keywords relate to which landing page. And then we could say, okay, are visitors who see that landing page, are they better quality than visitors who see a different landing page, and do all of that good stuff. Now, because again of apparently privacy concerns, we can see the queries, we can see the keywords that are bringing people to the site, but we can't marry those keywords with specific landing pages, which is a great shame. Lots of people would love to be able to continue to do that. I'm sure you would, but there it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I found some ways to go around doing that. They can get some of the information. But those, you said, there's definitely some custom programming involved with that. It's now out of the box solution. But I did find some ways to kind of capture that information, get keywords to specific landing pages. And as you said, if you really know a lot about development, coding, then it definitely opens the door to a lot more possibilities than people who are, you know, not aware of these things, because out of the box, it looks like a lot of things are like a closed system. But yeah, so that's really wonderful. I mean, have you ever seen people misinterpret analytics information? Have you ever worked with a company that
absolutely.
You share a little bit about that, like what happened there?
I have had times when, you know, one of my clients, the user has looked at a report and interpreted it incorrectly. I mean, maybe looking at clicks that were the wrong clicks for what she really wanted to know, and sort of started to make decisions based on an incorrect understanding. And luckily, you know, hopefully I was able to catch it in time and say, no, don't do that. So yeah, I mean, that's the problem. If you're the business owner and you're just looking at the raw reports without anybody helping you to interpret them, if you're not totally sure what you're looking at, again, unfortunately, it's possible to get wrong what it is that you think you're seeing, and then it's a bit dangerous to make decisions based on that.
So, like, at what point should business owners or like marketing directors hire like an analytics expert such as yourself?
Well, hopefully at the beginning, because like I said, if you set it up like you're working with third-party vendors and you build in all this third-party stuff that's really difficult to track, that's a pain. If you decide to use a form setup that is really difficult to track, that's a pain. You know, so sometimes it's nice to have some input right at the beginning so that you know that you're going to be able to track, and also so that you know what kind of customization you're going to want to do so that you can have that in place ahead of time. I mean, other than that, I guess as soon as possible after the site goes live so that you can start monitoring what's going on. I mean, because in my experience, you make a site live, you've really worked on your site strategy, you're understanding your audience and what you're trying to sell and how you're trying to sell it, and what your customer journey is. You kind of some sort of idea of how people are going to progress through your content and get to the outcome. But in my experience, the actual reality is often not that. It's not what you expect it to be. And not because you were wrong, but because you just didn't know what was going to happen. And so getting to grips with the analytics pretty quickly and being able to really track what's going on and start taking action on it, I think is quite important.
Can you share any stories about how you help companies increase their ROI through your analytics, wizardry?
Well, sometimes it's really, really obvious stuff. There was a bus company that I worked with, a transportation company, and there was a casino in their area, and they were the main transportation of choice. I mean, they were the preferred vendor for that casino. And the casino had a link from the casino website to the bus company's website to sort of say, this is our preferred transportation of vendor and so on. But the link went to the homepage of the website. And the homepage of the website was horrible. It was an absolute mess. And it had all sorts of things on it that casino visitors maybe is not their first thing that they're worried about. It had tons of different things on it and things like, our safety record and how we train our drivers and, what kind of tires, I don't know. But it was what there wasn't was a really clear kind of, if you want to get to this casino, this is how you do it. And obviously and so these people all left, right? And you can see, because you can see the traffic source, you can see that they're coming in from the casino website. And you can see that they're not really going through the site, they're just leaving. And of course, once you know that, the answer is very obvious, which is what we need is a landing page for this casino that says, welcome to people from this casino. Here's our routes, here's our schedules, here's 20% off your first ticket booking, here's where you book, right? And they don't have to go anywhere else. It's all there on that page. They book, they're gone. Right. And once you see that, obviously it's absolutely obvious. But if you didn't have the analytics, you wouldn't have that initial information that says, look, loads of visitors are coming to our site and leaving immediately. And a good proportion of them come from this one casino site. So what's happening? Right. Once you have that, you can diagnose it and then you can create the solution. And sometimes the solutions are screamingly obvious, like I've just explained, and sometimes they're not. But then what you do is you have to develop a theory about, well, let's try this or let's try this. And sometimes you have to try a few things until you figure out what's going to work better. But that's how it works.
Yeah, have you ever worked with a company that had multiple websites? Because some
Yes.
especially with some larger companies. How do you work with a company like that has multiple websites? I mean, because you have to check different analytics profiles and somehow merge all that data together.
Well, you don't really want to merge it all together. I mean, actually, I had a client recently where I recommended that they split the analytics. They had a website and a mobile app, and the mobile app was only for certain users to do specific things, and they were running the whole thing into one property. And I said, this is crazy because it's not helpful, because the mobile app doesn't have really acquisition numbers, because once you've got the app on your phone, you either use it or you don't. And they're doing all sorts of very different things. And the website was to generate app users. And so again, what you're looking for on the website is how do we get visitors and how many of them try the free trial and so on. It actually made a lot more sense to separate those two out so that we had clean data about, each type of user. And really that's the point. It's if you have multiple websites, to what extent are they trying to do the same thing with the same audience? And to what extent are they doing very different things with very different audiences, where if you mix the data, you're just going to get confused and spend most of your time trying to separate it out again. So, again, there's no one size fits all answer, but it depends on your circumstances.
What advice can you give to either business owners, entrepreneurs about either, how can they have better analytics or better look at, interpret the analytics that they do have? Is there any advice you can give people like that?
Well, there's always more to measure. I mean, one thing is not to measure absolutely everything you can all the time, because you'll just get completely overwhelmed and confused, and it doesn't really allow you to do anything. And it's much better to have the approach where you don't measure anything if you don't have a reason to measure it, because you really want to know what's happening. And if it's not what I want, what am I going to do about it? So actually having at any one time a few metrics that you've prioritized that you're focused on is a much better way to go than, as I say, trying to measure a whole load of different things. But it really just keeps going back to the really understanding what your strategies are, what you're trying to do, what outcomes you're looking for, and then really looking at, are those things happening? As well as, for somebody who's got a bit more experience, sometimes you can look at numbers and spot an opportunity or some sort of a problem that you haven't thought about as well, that just adds into the mix of that.
Now, some enterprise companies, they have multiple analytics. They'll have Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics simultaneously. And sometimes the data show, like the analytics show like different information. One, Adobe will say the website's getting 200,000 visitors a month. Google Analytics, what do you do in that situation? You have different analytics systems showing like different numbers, different reports.
Nothing.
Does that mean like it's all set up incorrectly, or is that like naturally where different types of software?
I know, and people get very hung up on this. The problem is that because different tools, like Google Search Console numbers don't match with Google Analytics 4 numbers. Different tools have different ways of doing things and maybe update reports at different times, measure data differently. There's lots of, have different session timeouts. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why that number could be different. And unless it's absolutely staggering and you're really looking at, this suggests that one of these tools isn't working properly. But if it's, most of the time, it's really not worth tearing your hair out about why tools are reporting different numbers, as much as just making sure that each tool is implemented to the best possible level as far as you know.
So, Philippa, if somebody had a question about analytics or interested in hiring you to help them with their analytics or, figure out their data to improve their sales and bottom line metrics, what are the best ways that they can get in touch with you?
Well, I think I'm the only person in the world with my name, so I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. And my website is called Websites That Win. So that's websitesthatwin.com. And on there, I have a free ebook that you're welcome to download. And it has 5 ideas of actually from my client experience where we've discovered something in the analytics that we couldn't have really known otherwise and made quite a big change either to the website or the business because of it. And it's all explained without any technical terms, without any charts or graphs or stuff like that in English. But it's designed to really help business owners to think maybe that's happening in my case, or maybe I should take a look at that and that kind of stuff. So hopefully it's there to inspire you.
Philippa, do you have any final words you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up today's podcast?
They're really just, honestly, if you have a website that plays any sort of a role in your business and you're not tracking with analytics how well it's doing, then you're wasting your time. You're wasting everything that you're putting into that site because you're shooting in the dark with your investment. You have no idea what's going on. And so I really would encourage you to if it's not Google Analytics, something else, Matomo, whatever, Piwik, put some sort of analytics package on your site and start using it intelligently.
Well, Philippa, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it and sharing all your wisdom with analytics. I know you reviewed thousands of websites, so you bring a wealth of knowledge to the table about that. So I'm sure a lot of people got a lot out of this conversation. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you.